Okay, folks, can I ask you to take your seats? Please take your seats. So it's Wednesday. For those of you who have just arrived, dragged yourselves out of bed. I hope you enjoyed the day yesterday. I think the rooms were quite well populated, and from what I gather from the presenters, folks were paying attention. There were a lot of good questions and a lot of good conversation, and a lot of people saying, gosh, I haven't seen you for X length of time. So I think we've really, amongst other things, accomplished one of our goals, which is to bring you all together again. So thank you all for coming. I'm glad you're here. I have one housekeeping remark, which is regarding the dinner tonight. It seems like there are more people than we thought who are vegetarian or who prefer vegetarian food anyhow. This was in evidence yesterday during the reception. So what I would ask you to do, assuming you're all coming to dinner this evening, and I hope you will, let the administration room, Todd or April, oh no, April's gone home actually to take care of things at the office, but Todd will be there and so will some of our volunteers. Let us know if you would like a vegetarian meal this evening, because we will need to let the kitchen know in good time so that they're prepared for you. And we'll have a little green ticket that we'll give you, and you will give that to your server, and the server will then know that you will have a vegetarian option. So please do that, and that way I think you'll enjoy your meal at least much better. Also later on in the evening will be the presentation of 4 of CASI's senior awards, prestigious awards. One of them is the McKee Trophy. I'll focus on that just for a moment. This is the oldest award in the aviation sector that is presented in Canada every year. It was initiated in 1927. And this year it will be going to a military organization, Colonel Payan. Unfortunately, I think Catherine will miss meeting Colonel Payan unless he arrives earlier today. The Aerospace Engineering Test Establishment is the honoree. And so that's one of the 4 awards. I'll perhaps have a chance to talk about the others later on, but I would encourage you all to attend. The award part of the evening will be relatively brief once the dessert service begins. So that's the housekeeping part. Please let us know if you would like a vegetarian meal. So this morning we have the honor and the pleasure of welcoming Colonel Catherine Marchetti, who is on our board and helps to provide the governance that CASI requires in order to do the things we need to do. I'm just going to read you a little bit about Colonel Marchetti's background and how she got to the very elevated level that she finds herself in today with the Canadian Forces. So I'm just going to read a bit from her bio. Colonel Marchetti is a Royal Canadian Air Force aerospace engineer and a graduate from RMC. Throughout her career, she held several space-related positions across a variety of organizations, both within and outside the department, such as in space operations for the RadarSat-1 satellite at CSA, followed by a tour at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Lincoln Lab as an orbital analyst for the U.S. Space Surveillance Network. Later on, Colonel Marchetti worked as the Space Surveillance System Engineer for the Surveillance of Space project, as well as the Group Leader for Space Systems and Operations at the Defense Research and Development Canada Ottawa Research Centre. She also served as the Director of Space Strategy and Plans under Director General of Space. Colonel Marchetti did a few tours in the air maintenance world as well, most notably as the Senior Aircraft Maintenance and Engineering Officer at 424 Squadron, which is Transport and Rescue. Later, she worked at the Directorate Technical Airworthiness and Engineering Support as Chief of Staff. In 2020, Colonel Marchetti took command of the Canadian Forces Joint Imagery Centre, leading the delivery of geospatial intelligence and managing the RadarSat Constellation Mission / Polar Epsilon 2 capability. Promoted to her current rank in 2022, Colonel Marchetti is the first 7-wing (space) commander under 3 Canadian Space Division, where she is responsible for space operations and the delivery of space effects supporting Canadian Armed Forces operations at home and abroad. Colonel Marchetti is an officer of the Order of Military Merit, holds a bachelor's degree in space sciences, a master's degree in atmospheric physics and in defense studies, and is project management professional certified. And I could go on. Catherine Marchetti is a very accomplished professional, and Colonel Marchetti, welcome. Please come up.
Good morning, bonjour tout le monde. Vous pouvez m'entendre bien? Je crois que notre IT en arrière, là, il fait bien ça. So I would like to first recognize that we're gathering on the traditional unceded indigenous land of the Canadian Kahaka Nation. I'm so very pleased to join you here today because my passion for space started very early on. You can see my bio. And actually, I think the first space conference I attended was CASI Astro, so many, many years ago. So to be here today, I'm deeply honored to be giving these remarks. I want to congratulate CASI, Jeff and the team for putting such a premier annual conference together, especially after the last 2 years with the pandemic. And the sessions and conversations I've heard so far are truly inspiring. The space community is alive and well. It's great to be able, once again, to meet in person, to be able to exchange with friends, colleagues, and share that space passion of ours face to face. Despite all the technology and advanced tools now available to us to be able to connect remotely and virtually, they cannot replace that human interaction, allowing us to not only advance our respective mandates, but also advance space for Canada. And as per the CASI's vision, it allows us to continue to promote Canadian competence and international competitiveness in space, and foster national pride and international esteem for Canada's accomplishments in space. So that's CASI vision. And the title of this year's conference, Pushing the Boundaries, could not be more appropriate. Because then space is an evolving sector. Like some still call it emerging, but Canada and many of us in this room, like we know, we've been involved with space for many years, even decades. And in that time, we have seen space play an increasingly critical role for government, for militaries, for commerce, and in our daily lives. And we need to continue pushing those boundaries of our knowledge and experience to be able to continue to leverage space technology and what space has to offer in order to meet our mandate and protect Canadians' interests. Today, I will discuss how the Government of Canada is prioritizing space to better protect our Canadian, and also more specifically about how defense and the Canadian Armed Forces are moving ahead to address the challenges that we face in the space domain. And as many have asked, I will highlight the Royal Canadian Air Force new Canadian Space Division, as well as how Canada will use space technology to modernize support to operations at home and abroad, continental defense, and to work with our allies to increase resiliency. So yesterday we heard a lot about the importance of space technology to observe and track what's happening on Earth, for exploration and science, to help solve challenges on Earth, as well as to inspire. But space technologies are also absolutely essential to the Canadian way of life. They play a fundamental role with respect to protecting and preserving Canadian national security, public safety, economic prosperity, and our way of life. So let me take a few minutes to talk about the current global context. By almost any measures, it's not going well in the world. We listen to the news, and we can see that our world is unfortunately growing darker and more volatile in many areas. Emboldened authoritarian regimes are threatening the rule-based international order that has underpinned global security and prosperity since the Second World War. Russia's illegal and unjustifiable ongoing invasion of Ukraine and China's aggressions in the Indo-Pacific region are just two examples. Although space is considered a global commons, of which its unrestricted access and use is essential to the security and sovereignty of most nations, as well as space system being used in important elements of a state's national infrastructure, both state and non-state actors are looking for sophisticated ways and technology to disrupt daily life and wreak havoc in the world. For example, by jamming space-based GPS and communication systems that we rely on every day, before our smartphones, navigation, banking, and more. Russia, for one, continues to invest in the weaponization of space. Last fall, the Russians demonstrated their ability to destroy a satellite using a ground-based missile. This anti-satellite test that created a very large amount of debris that will remain in space for many years, many decades, and it's putting at risk many of the space assets that we depend on. There was actually a presentation yesterday by Comspoc, and they were highlighting that the ASAT tests done by countries like Russia and China in the last few years, those have dramatically increased the amount of space debris that are orbiting in orbit, and they are putting in danger tens of satellites used by nations around the world. These include the International Space Station and many Canadian satellites. Their presentation also highlighted unconventional moves by the Russian Luch satellite, which travels in the geobelt, coming close to commercial satellites and staying there for periods of time. Why would they do that, do you think? Why did they feel the need to do these maneuvers, and then which could be very dangerous? The space domain is increasingly becoming congested, and competitive. It is now extremely apparent that these characteristics also converging and overlapping, thereby further complicating the space domain, and a fact that will only grow over the next decades. This is why Canada's defense policy, Strong, Secure, Engage, or you'll hear it referred to as SSE, recognizing the global nature and importance of space, in addition to Canada's increasing reliance on and the vulnerability of those space systems, our policy places a real emphasis on modernizing our approach to space to respond to these sophisticated threats. SSE was actually the first defense policy document ever to mention space, but not only mention it, but also highlight its importance. There are significant space language and also very specific initiatives related to space that national defense has to work on, such as investing in cutting-edge capability like satellite communications, space domain awareness, space-based observation and surveillance, and the urgent need to prioritize research and development on new space technology in close collaboration with allies, with industry and academia, in order to enhance the resiliency of space capability and continue to support the Canadian Armed Forces missions. It also means working closely with our allies to protect Canadian interests and national security, while promoting the peaceful and responsible use of space to ensure that space remains a stable, sustainable, and secure environment. Last April, the government announced that it's updating our Canadian defense policy because the document was released in 2017, and modernizing our space capabilities is expected to remain a key priority. Now, I would like to share with you some of the ways how the Canadian Armed Forces are using space-based technologies to protect our national security and Canada's sovereignty. The fact is, modern militaries rely on space for a wide range of functions, from long-range communications, navigation, conducting surveillance around the world, and we have for decades. I mean, this is not new. We see this with the war in Ukraine, where high-resolution satellite imagery is capturing Russian troop movements, informing decision makers. Canada has actually been providing Ukraine with funding for satellite imagery. And just a few weeks ago, our Minister Anand, has announced that Canada will provide $2 million in satellite communication services to Ukraine through a joint project between the Canadian Armed Forces, Communication Security Establishment, and Telesat. We also see it with climate change, where the Canadian Armed Forces need modern communication and mapping tools to respond to extreme weather. I mean, we've seen it with the flooding and the forest fire in British Columbia, and more recently with Hurricane Fiona. Recognition of the increasingly critical importance of space in all of the military's operation is driving the slow but steady growth and evolution of the space enterprise in national defense. When it was initiated approximately 10 years ago, the Director General Space, DG Space, some of you might have heard of this organization. DG Space was focused primarily on the development of space capabilities to support CAF operations. However, as the responsibility for conducting space operations has steadily grown over the last decade in alignment with the defense policy, so too the need to reorganize our space team within the Canadian Armed Forces. Thus, recognizing how critical space has become to our national security, the 3 Canadian Space Division under the Royal Canadian Air Force was established last July, with Brigadier General Adamson as the first commander. The transition to 3 Canadian Space Division will better prepare us to face the challenges and then this expanded scope that we have to address. The responsibility for the development of space capabilities, what we call force development, has been transferred to another DG organization, which we call DG Air and Space Force Development, and this one is led by Brigadier General McKenna. And I know an organization chart would have been very useful at this point, but I guess this will be for next time. The transition to 3 Canadian Space Division has realigned our organizational structure to enable effective decision-making at the appropriate level. This will improve efficiency and timeliness, and will improve support to CAF operations at home and abroad. 3 Canadian Space Division will focus on bolstering Canada's space-based technology, capability, and support so that we can keep the operational advantage as new technologies emerge. It will improve how space-based capabilities support critical Canadian Armed Forces requirements, such as communications, command and control, navigation, weather, and situational awareness, which will then enable our military and senior leadership to make more informed or better informed and timely decisions. It will help us ensure that we can monitor Canada's maritime approach in the Arctic more closely, and that space capabilities can continue to assist in search and rescue operations across the country and more. The establishment of 3 Canadian Space Division is an important step in building an innovative armed forces that can better anticipate and act on modern threats. The stand-up of 3 Canadian Space Division also included the establishment of 7 Space Wing, and this is where I come in. So I'm actually the first commander of our Space Wing. Our mission is to integrate and assure space-based enable effect in all Canadian Armed Forces operations at home and abroad. The stand-up of the division did not come with a large influx of personnel, unfortunately. Instead, it's more of an evolution of the organization and the space team we had before, with, of course, a few extra positions coming up in the next few years. 3 Canadian Space Division plans to employ about 175 people, and it's going to be comprised of a mix of military and civilian team members. And it will be providing our military with highly specialized jobs and the technological skills that go with it. And then, of course, like what we heard yesterday with CSC's initiative on the Space Hub and then the STEM, we're, of course, working with them and fully supportive of that effort because we will need more young people with the right space expertise. So what we're doing with the Canadian Space Division is in line with similar investment our allies are making. First, the US created their US Space Force back in 2019. Then last year, the UK stood up their Space Command. earlier this year, Australia announced that it was also created their Defense Space Command. And then there's us. The creation of the 3 Canadian Space Division means that Canada will be better positioned to coordinate our efforts with our allies around the globe, which means more stakeholders in the responsible use and protection of the space environment to deter or alter potential adversary plans and intentions. For example, Canada is a core member of the Combined Space Operations Initiative, what we refer to as CSPO, and it's a 5I agreement that was, when we mean 5I in the military context, is Canada, US, UK, Australia, and New Zealand. So the initial agreement was signed in 2014, but it now includes participation with other like-minded nations such as France and Germany. 3 Canadian Space Division will continue Canada's commitment to CSPO and its efforts to enhance cooperation in defense space activity. It will remain as a key venue for discussion of operational policy, legal, and capability issues related to space and will advance shared objectives. Now, I would also like to mention that this new division is not only the only way that the government of Canada is boosting our country's defense capabilities in space. This June, it was announced that Canada will invest $38.6 billion over the next 20 years to modernize our contribution to NORAD to strengthen continental defense. With the emergence of new technology, we can no longer rely on our geographic isolation to keep Canadians safe. And we know that the Arctic is fast gaining the attention of countries like Russia and China, with China going as far as calling themselves a near-Arctic nation. And as they look to increase their security and economic footprint, we need to be ready. This is why Canada's NORAD modernization plan includes new funding for enhanced satellite communication and surveillance so that we can detect threats in the north earlier and more precisely. It also includes additional funding for space-based domain awareness, which provides vital support for NORAD missions both in the air and at sea. Much like the 3 Canadian Space Division, these new investments build on the commitment in Canada's defense policy to bolster our space security. Now, let's talk about partnership. National Defense works closely with many other government departments, such as, of course, the CSA, Global Affairs Canada, IASC, Public Safety, the intelligence community, and more. But as government have shown, unfortunately, we're not the quickest or necessarily most efficient for innovation. We critically need the commercial sector and academia to help us solve the key challenges that we're facing. A few weeks ago, Minister Anand spoke at the Spacebound Canada conference, where she highlighted the importance of working with industry to develop space-based technology to support the work of the Canadian Armed Forces. Commercial partnerships play a vital role in developing new space-based technology and providing services and capability that are critical to conduct military operations. Working with industry provides the Canadian Armed Forces an opportunity to identify the applicability of emerging technologies and to determine the best value for investment that meet the operational requirements essential to the Government of Canada and the Canadian Armed Forces. I was glad to hear our Innovation in Defense Excellence and Security program mentioned yesterday, something that we call the IDS program, because it's a great example on how we're trying to better leverage cutting-edge space-based technologies. The program is based on a list of challenges facing the Canadian Armed Forces, and it provides funding to Canadian innovators to help turn the most promising ideas into defense and security solutions. It supports projects from concept to prototype testing all the way through capacities development. The goal is to invest $1.6 billion over 2 decades to spur innovation in a wide range of fields, including the space sector. Last year alone, the program funded 162 projects with contracts exceeding $76 million. Through this program, we are partnering with the private sector to find new ways, for example, to track and deorbit space debris, protect satellites from natural and artificial threats, and more. So as you can see, there's a lot happening on the defense, national defense. There's a lot happening in national defense on the space front. It's absolutely essential that we continue to evolve and adapt in order to be able to better understand what's happening in space and how it can affect not only military operation, but also our national and economic security, so that we can develop means of increasing our resiliency and ensuring access to space and data and services that Canadians need. As I talked about earlier, it's not going well in the world, and we need to be prepared to respond to the threat to protect Canadian national interests. All the while, as technology evolves at lightning speed, we also have a responsibility to be good stewards in space. We have a responsibility to ensure that the space remains an area of collaboration, scientific advancement, sustainability, and peace. And that is the place where we solve modern challenges and not create new ones. And together, we will continue looking to space to protect Canadians, protect our planet, and build better lives here at home. I probably still have some time because I think Jeff gave me a lot of time, but I'm going to stop here and give the opportunity for questions or perhaps an early break for a coffee refill. Again, thank you to CASI for letting me share the latest on the defense space front. And I will borrow from someone's quote yesterday, and we can now go to the Ask the Colonel portion of the morning. So thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Colonel, you want to handle questions yourself, or would you like me to field them?
I can answer it myself, yeah.
So we have a mic here, a mic there, and we may have a roving mic as well.
I might not have all the answers, but again, like you saw in my bio, I'm one of the very few officers in the military that have spent most of my career in space, so hopefully I can do most of the answering for sure.
I think you've struck them dumb.
I know.
I'll try. I can prepare. So you're hiring 175 people. A fairly large company in Canada already. And all the companies in Canada are having great trouble hiring qualified people. Any thoughts on where you're going to find the 175 people?
So let me say that we're not hiring 175, right? We have been having like lots of people working in space already, right? So we are expanding a little bit, but we already had most of the positions. So now I would say 75% of those positions are on the military side. So, and then on that side, we mostly from the Air Force, but because space, we call it as a joint environment, because actually the Air Force is the environment that uses space the less, right? If compared to the Navy or the Army. So we have engineers, we have operators, we have a bit of a mix, right? So now, I'm sure you're talking more about because it takes several years to generate our military officer to be able to be functional. But yeah, I'm sure you're talking more on the civilian side, right? So yes, we need more people. Like I mentioned earlier, the government is not the greatest at going quickly for innovation and things like that, where we're having a similar challenge on the hiring front, because the public service hiring is it's quite of a detailed process. I was talking with some of my CSA colleagues, and then so it is kind of slow. And then what we're facing in the department is you probably heard in the news, it's not just some of the crisis happening in the military side, but also we don't have enough. We have the position, we cannot just hire quickly enough. So yes, so very interesting, like I say, working with the CSA to how do we generate the right people for what we're going to be needed. But like we're doing even with our military officer, because not many have space, is that we want to bring in some new people and just train them into, with some of the basic skills, right? So we don't expect we're going to find many with like 10 years of space experience. There'll be a few, but they're, like you said, like also the commercial side is growing really quickly. So it is a very wicked challenge, but I'm hoping, being here today and hearing the conversation, seeing the interest in our young people, studying in space and solving those challenges. And it's just that we want to be able to then keep them in Canada and don't lose them to go inside. But yeah, it is a big challenge for us. Yeah.
Good morning, Colonel Marchetti. From a space operational perspective, what keeps you up at night? It would be part one. And then 10 years from now, in an ideal world, where would you hope to see space operations transition to or incorporate into the day-to-day operations that you oversee now?
Well, what keeps me up at night is you see what's happening. I mentioned it already. It's all in the open, like what Russia and China are doing in space. You just track, if you're tracking all the launches that are happening, and many of them are just for observation and all that, but there's many satellites being launched for where we don't know what they're going to be doing. When we see Russia bringing their satellite close to another satellite to do what? Like, why are you doing that, right? There should be a purpose. So it's all this type of activity that's happening, and that despite on the international in the international fora and the UN and all that, like those countries being public, they don't want to weaponize space and all that, but that's not what they're doing. So we're tracking that really closely, and that's, even Russia last week, a few days ago, publicly saying that they could, I'm not exactly sure how they put it, they didn't, just going to paraphrase it, but basically they could do something to commercial satellites that are supporting Ukrainian. This is very, very worrisome. Yes, we're there and we're tracking what's happening, but like I said, we want, all of us want space to remain peaceful and all that. Just you're seeing what those countries are doing, and then it's really worrisome. Now, where do I want to see space operation in the future? I think it's about continuing where we are, like just understanding what's happening in space, being able to provide, like on the military side, provide our forces with the capability that they need to be able to do their job more efficiently. It's continuing to partner with the other government department, industry, academia, continuing that work, because really we're on this together, and then just continuing to progress that, like, of course, having our respective mandate, but having this understanding and this cross-pollination as much as possible. Okay.
At this point in time, I think it's pretty easy much easier for young women to get jobs in the space sector, because the space sector needs warm bodies right now. For the first few years, they will probably be really well accepted and get some pretty amazing experience in their, what I call, sweet young thing mode. People like to work with them then. But as they age, they become less desirable. And I'm hoping that you're thinking ahead on that in terms of how to retain their capabilities when the sector may decline again at some point.
Absolutely, of course, not just personally, but like not just within the space enterprise, but within the national defense and all that. There's a huge, I don't want to say movement, it's really an awakening. It's been there for many years, right? Trying to find out why our women are retiring earlier than men, right? And from the military stand, understanding those functions and then breaking down those barriers. So that work has been going on for many years. And I think it is getting better. Just having the proper maternity leaves and not being penalized for that and getting the opportunities and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's getting better on our side. I'm hearing a lot of conversation at the highest level on that. And And I think it is changing. I mean, I got promoted to colonel this year, and just being at looking around the table, I used to be the only woman for the longest time and the youngest and all that. And now I see there's a lot more women around the table, and it's great to see. So I think it's going to take years. Yeah, and also we apply that when we are going to be hiring as well, right? So because women are considered a minority for the public service, so of course the person has to be deserving of the job. You don't want to bring in women just because they're women, and again, that's a big thing for me, like you gotta be deserving of the job. So I think we're moving in the right direction, but it's definitely on top of mind as far as what I've seen both on the military and on the public service side.
In some ways, it's almost unfair to hire them if there isn't a plan to retain them. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
Hello. Hi. Warren So from York University for today. Congrats, Colonel, for the new command. First off, thank you very much. Quick question on, obviously you mentioned concerns with Luge, for example, and I believe the news was on Monday that there was, as you mentioned, an adversary might be hinting at taking down not just defense satellites assets, our assets, but also civilian. Just curious, having known that, what's the response? What's our response? Or should I go as far as countermeasures? Because I don't think we're going a tete-a-tete with, if something were to happen, which is a scenario where, Canadian space assets are targeted.
What we're trying to do a lot more of, and you think it can be a soft response, but at the same time is saying very publicly that those kinds of behavior are not, responsible behavior in space. They are putting at risk many satellites. So I've seen in the last year, like even maybe 3 years ago, I mean, where every time there's an ASAT, right? Like, we should be very publicly saying how bad this is, right? All the country, because if you don't say anything, it's like, well, that's okay. And then it gives signal to some other country that, say, oh, that's okay. So we could do that as well, and it'll be okay. So that's kind of some of the initial response we want. Like, you never want to get to a military response if you can, right? Like, I mean, yes, we're kind of trying to be prepared and things like that, but it's about to find those solutions that will diplomatically allow us to solve those challenges, right? So publicly saying things out loud, better understanding what's happening in space with the, like I was mentioning, the Luge, again, like that has been publicly said, like, we work really closely with the US as well. Okay, we're going to say something, because, I mean, we have access to some capabilities that can determine provide a little bit more detail. So just going out there and calling those things out. So, but, to be honest, there's not much that we can do. Like, nobody wants to create more debris. Like, we just, it's going to be really hard to have another global, international law. Those who, I'm not sure if around the table, if around the room, some people are involved with that. There's very few laws, right? So, but just a few months ago, declaration about responsible use of space and what you should. If you're going to move your satellite close to mine, let me know. And why are you doing that? So that we can coordinate. But these kinds of things are not happening. And what we're seeing in the last few months with I guess, I'm not sure if it's related to Ukraine or not, it's just we're keeping track. So that's why we need to continue to build that space domain awareness that we call, that understanding why are these things moving, what are they doing, so that we can inform, and then, yeah.
Colonel, if I may. You mentioned that the Canadian military is cooperating in the level of space with a variety of other countries, which of course makes sense. I wonder if the areas of cooperation that are negotiated amongst the international players are shared, or if there is a particular area of responsibility that's designated for a particular country to own, and then another country will own a different aspect of international cooperation. Or is it sort of everybody shares a little bit of everything? Is there a policy the way that works out?
So the way we're approaching that is that we're sharing, because I mean, a few years ago, there were talk about, oh, we should do a joint project, right? That will help us. It's extremely difficult to do. So I think now there's a realization that we all, each of our national mandates, we have our national capability. It's about how do we identify gaps, right? How do we work together? So perhaps we can include some requirements from other countries, you know, for example, and then, you know, working that piece. And because ultimately, we don't want one system to do this, one system to do this. We need resiliency, right? We need a layer, like you talk about Earth observation, for example, you need a layer of capability that will provide you EOIR, SAR, and all that, right? So we're looking at this more from a resiliency point of view, that shared understanding. Also, like on the operation side, is also like how do we ensure that, you know, when we do missions together, right, that we have access to the right systems. So sometimes we might not have it, but we can ask another country. So coordination on that front, and just making sure we're all understanding where we're all standing. So that's kind of how we're looking at it, and really very broadly, not any type of capability. So.
All right, I'll go again. I'm just, you know, I don't mean to take somebody else's place, but rush up to the mics to cut me off here. Another question about Canadian policy with regard to our own militarization of space. So normally when you have a situation developing, if you want to counter that threat as it emerges, you need to yourself be a credible threat against it. So the question is, for Canada to maintain our own sovereignty and our security, is there a policy that will empower us to militarize some aspects of our space activities so that at least we have some kind of a basic response in the event that we're attacked?
So let me just make the difference, right? Militarization and weaponization, right? There's a lot of questions about that. The way we see militarization is using space to support military operation, and we've been doing that for a very, very long time, right? So we're definitely doing that. The weaponization is really the big, something you never want to go there, right? And it's Canada's policy. We're never going to put a weapon in space. So now, where we want to be, it's not so much that we want to be a credible threat to others, but we really want, you know, you heard me speak about resiliency. We really want to continue building those layers of capability so that, you know, if an adversary wanted to impact us, like not just, okay, I'm going to take down that satellite. Well, you can, but it doesn't matter because we have so many other systems we can access that it doesn't really matter. Right? So I think this is where I think we're going to get to that deterrence effect, that, you know, there's no point doing this because we still have access. Like when I was in, just before I took command, I was commanding officer for our Joint Imagery Center. So we do geospatial intelligence. So this is probably the biggest user of space-based asset in national defense. So basically using imagery satellites, you know, to look at different areas of the world and what are they doing, right? So we used to depend heavily on allied assets, but now with the pandemic we had, and also the explosion of commercial capability, we had the opportunity to look at, okay, what can I use? You know, Planet Lab, of course we're using RCM, like other, and just testing and all that, right? And just became so comfortable in using those other types of provider that if we lose access to one system, it's okay, we can still do our job because we have other means, right? So I think increasing our resiliency not only in access, but how we call them TTPs, I don't even remember what TTP stands for, but it's basically all of our procedures that we have in place that we know, if something happened, we know exactly how we're going to deal. We have a checklist, and it's very seamless, right? So that's kind of why, how we're trying to get around to doing that. Okay.
Hi, good morning. Leanne Evans-Brito from MDA. I just wanted to pull on that resiliency thread and understand, going forward, the outlook of, let's say, the National Defense Department, and is it intended to build the resiliency in terms of national assets being launched into space? Or are you going to be looking forward to employing services of, let's say, commercial providers who can build in that capability to their systems? Or is it the next level of resiliency between different nations worldwide, where you can not, let's say, base it on your fundamental foundation, but as a emergency use case, essentially?
We definitely need a mix of all those three things: the national asset, the commercial side, and allied, right? So, for example, again, on Earth observation, yes, you probably heard that Canada is working on a follow-on to RCM to respond to our need, because now we're with the other government department on RCM, but DND is a very, very big user of RCM, right? So, and we have some other requirements, so that's why we have a project in place to do that. But this is not going to be enough. It's not going to solve everything. So we're also working with the Canadian Space Agency on their Earth observation, IASC, I think it's still called that, or maybe there's a change in name. It's changed name over the years, but working with them as well to build that resiliency. And like I was saying earlier as well, like in some of the different units, like how do we bring in, putting in place those contracting mechanism with different provider so that we can have that easy. Because again, like for DND, if we want to get some imagery from a commercial provider, if you don't have a contract in place already, or what we call the NMSO, it's very difficult. So how can we do that in advance and then build that and also continue having access to allied systems? So it's really a mix. So the services aspect, and it applies to satellite communication again, and now we're seeing advances also on the commercial side, on the SSA side. So we expect we'll most likely be leveraging that. We really have to look at all that. I know a few years ago, mentality was like, just need a national system and they're going to do everything, but we're way past that. And the thing is, there's so much out there. Like the explosion of commercial capability is so exciting, and they're all offering different things. You all have different models on how you're providing those services and analytical services, so it's really exciting. So it will be a mix. Yeah, I can give another example for satellite communication, right? So in the past, even in the military, I think there was this, people were still a little bit naive that, okay, I'm having this, I'm sending some ships, and we'll secure some satellite communication to a commercial provider like we've done in the past. What kind of band do you need, blah, blah, blah. And you put that contract in place. Well, now what's happening in the world, we know that depending on the system and which one it is, it can be easily jammed or could be put at risk. So what my team is doing, continuing building that space mindedness and space aware, even within our forces, is like, okay, have you thought about if you're jammed? Like, how are you going to be communicating and then building even resiliency layers, because we have some missions that are no-fail, so they absolutely need to be there. So just another example on the SATCOM side. Yeah, I think. Yeah.
You've spoken in the resiliency part of it, relying mainly on redundancy. So having other aspects, you mentioned allies, commercial, our own assets. Another factor in resiliency can be replacement. So are the forces considering anything to do with responsive replacement, keeping satellites in storage, ready for launch, and a responsive launch in order to be able to make a quick replacement of those capabilities?
Well, it's been talked about for many years. It's something, of course, we're very interested. It's just something we haven't had the time to really look as much in detail as the next layer of the resiliency piece, right? We know there's a well, hopefully Canada is going to have a launch capability in the next few years. We know, for example, there's some partnership that I've heard with the Virgin Galactic, perhaps, for responsive launch. There's all kinds of things happening. So as a national defense organization, we really want to having something built and launched from Canadian soil. It makes things so much easier, and it would allow us that flexibility. So yes, we're interested. It's just we really haven't had the time and the resources to look at this into more detail, but it's a key piece of the resiliency, for sure.
When you do get there, please consider Canadian launch companies as well.
Absolutely.
Not just Virgin Galactic.
No. I was just mentioning that some that are maybe closer to providing something, but very exciting to see rocket launch Canada. Like there was a competition a few months ago, seeing the interest in university in doing that, but not only university, some Canadian companies looking at that. So absolutely, because for us, it makes it a lot easier if we have a defense payload to launch from Canadian company, Canadian soil, and all that makes it a lot easier. So for sure.
Thank you.
I have a bit of an abstract out in left field question. I thought maybe it would be fun to ask. We talk a lot of state actors and in the domain of space, and of course state responses to that and leveraging commercial capabilities to be resilient and react to that. But what about non-state actors that have emerging space infrastructure capabilities that are comparable to state actors? And of course I'm talking about Elon Musk specifically, but he may not be the only one. How is that viewed in the military domain and in just a national strategic capacity that, how do you handle that? I'm just curious.
It's really a big shift. And of course, we talk a lot with our, colleagues south of the border and all that, but I think there's really a shift to, how can we leverage that? We should be embracing all this new stuff coming online, right? We should be a lot more open about our need and what we need. And once the companies come up with the solution, that we can then buy the services and things like that. So I think we're in a really good place. I think this is where we need to go, is continue, not only leveraging, but embracing the new stuff and looking at ways of how we can use that to support our efforts, right? And not see that as a competition, right? It's more like, how do we leverage that so that then we can use our resources to do something else, because it's already being covered by by the commercial side.
And is there a risk aspect to it in the sense that, say, someone has launch capacity, satellite constellation, they could be exploring surface of other celestial bodies, arguably independent of government? Does that pose a threat, or are there risks with that?
There's always risk, right? It's always about balancing the risk, right? And then how much are you willing to accept? And sometimes it depends, well, not sometimes, it always depends on the situation, right? So I'll give the example, right, of the of remote sensing in RSSA, right? When RadarSat was first launched, right, there was a big concern. Okay, what's going to be the resolution and what can be released? What if a company comes up with a system that has can then track, cars and people and how we get, right? So they put in place the RSSA, right? But as we've seen, at some point, companies keep, innovating and coming up with sensors that with better in resolution. And at one point, you cannot, prevent them from selling, this kind of. So we have to adapt, right? We have to see what's happening, adapt, evaluate the risks, what's acceptable, what's not, balance also, because it's not just in Canada, but in the US and all that, we want our companies to be successful and all that, so you don't want to put too many barriers, but at the same time, want to protect national interest. And sometimes, I was involved in some of the cases where we're reviewing some of the capability on the space side, and then it's about, sometimes the military or defense is seen as, well, they're gonna, prevent us from doing it. They're adding all these layers, but often it's also to protect you as a commercial company, right? Just making sure that you have, want you to, do those encryptions or things like that to to protect your technology. Maybe you don't want to put your ground station there because, you know, there's another country that can listen to it, right? That kind of stuff. So I think it's always evaluating the risk. You know, nothing is risk-free, and balancing what's good for national security, but also for the economic security as well. So.
Thanks for indulging my crazy question.
That's good.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Karika with Virgin Galactic.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Just want to let everybody know our company split a little while ago, so Virgin Orbit's the one that hopefully we'll be launching here. So they're not in attendance, so we can still trash them for the Canadian launch companies. In the US, we have the Wolf Amendment, which bans NASA from collaborating with China. And I've learned just this week that Canada participates in the SMILE program, which is an ESA Chinese program. And of course, Canada is a member of ESA, and ESA has other partnerships with China. Is there a conversation about CSA not participating in Chinese programs, especially if it's such a concern for the defense and their horrendous behavior in our commons? Or does Canada encourage ESA not to do Chinese programs?
That's a very good question. We did the review, like CSA, again, we have a really close partnership with CSA, right? I'm not saying, I don't think Eric is there on the policy side. So we do have those conversations and those consultation, and you know, for us, it's about evaluating the risks. And I think a few years ago, that's many years ago now that was put in place. I think it was felt that there was enough safeguards at the time, but there's also a realization, not, you know, defense we've known for many years, but about, you know, some country, how they're approaching not only space, but everything. It's not just for national security, it's economic security, right? And how important it is for Canada to be mindful of that when they do collaboration with certain countries, right? So, because we have many, many examples of, you know, companies doing business, you know, with certain country, and then a few years down the road, the IP is no longer in Canada, right? So it's not ultimate. Yes, there's an inject of money initially, but it's not helping at the end, right? So we're trying to kind of continually raising awareness, but I think now we're in a much better position than we were before. There's very senior level discussions on that, and then how do we, and we see it, like just the Minister of ICE said recently, there were some comments made on protecting, you know, cybersecurity as well and all that, so we're moving in the right direction, but those conversations are happening, and it's evaluating the risk times.
That's about it for questions.
Yeah, I think there's one
more.
Yeah, this is Lee Chen from University of Saskatchewan. We are at the university environment. So my question actually is that we have some international students, and I'm a little bit scared to come to this DOD because international student, I know that in US, right, it's a little bit sensitive topic. At US, I know a lot of grad students, international, they are not allowed to attend a lot of this kind of DOD-oriented project. I mean, for Canada, anyway, I haven't involved any kind of this kind of project. I just wonder, in general speaking, in Canada, what's the policy? And for example, for the grad student, international grad student in the future, they possibly could get involved in, get hired in this field of. Could you just give some information on that?
I don't have a lot of details on it. I think it depends the projects, the initiatives that are being worked on. And I mentioned earlier, we are involved with other intelligence agencies that help with the security clearance and vetting of people involved in some of the project. But yeah, so I think it's going to depend on which initiative they would be working on.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Just one more question.
Yeah.
I'm relatively new to this space, so I'm, so to speak. So speak to me like you're speaking to a golden retriever. My question really is, you mentioned this notion of commercialization as key to this evolving sector, right? Defense. In government, we talk about open data principles, right? And I recognize there's a lot of sensitivity around data for obvious reasons. So I'm curious, so essentially, what is DND's posture around these open data principles and the work that you do at DND, given the security environment that you're dealing with? Because I think it's obviously very important, given, as you said, the commercial aspect, but also all these other state actors that are involved in security.
So here again, it's a question of balance, right? We also want to support open data because really, like, we know that's how we can have commercial industry, academia. If they get access to that kind of data, then it's easier for them to study, do research, come up with new ways and things like that. It's just the other side of the coin, right? And again, I'll take, we're dealing with that, of course, with RCM and all that, is that if we're using certain asset to support our people that are deployed in operation and all that, we might not want be that open that everybody knows where we're looking at and why, and then, right, and that kind of stuff. So how do we protect those aspects? And I think, I think we've come up with a good way with RCM and things like that. So as much as possible, we want to keep the data open because, again, the benefits that I mentioned is just there's always that other aspect from a national security, protecting our deployed forces, protecting what we do, things like that, that we have to kind of balance.
Well, this may be it.
There you go.
Well, my time has come. I'll do it down here. On behalf of...
I'll go down.
Give you this back.
All right.
There you go.
Oh, you can go. Yeah, there you go.
Catherine, on behalf of CASI and all the organizers and the people here, I'd like to thank you very much for a very broad and comprehensive presentation. And also, I think what we really appreciated was the openness and the freedom of expression when the question period arrived. And thank you very much for that. I asked Jeff to say the thanks, because normally he's the guy that does this, because he's a professional, right? I'm not, so. But what struck me was in the Air Force, okay, there's different classifications for officers. And way back in the 70s, I was AIRE, Aerospace Engineering. I always thought that was a funny name because we had nothing in space, man. But I thought it was kind of pretentious, right? And as Jeff was reading your bio, and I started to listen to you, I said, finally we made it. You know, the AIRE classification actually has space, and you're the poster child for it. Congratulations, you're doing us proud. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. That was great. Thank you, Al. The rest of the day, I think, will be rich with content and hopefully conversation amongst all of us. We're going to break into 3 parallel sessions now. For those of you who will be going to the Concerto Room for the first time, it's all the way at the end of the hall. Our lunch keynote presentation today will be one that I'm sure many of us have been looking forward to, with Neil Rowlands and René Doyon talking about the James Webb Space Telescope first results. I'm hoping we'll have some nice imagery to enjoy. We will then have 2 more sessions, technical parallel sessions this afternoon, separated by a coffee break. And then this evening, the gala reception and dinner. I've mentioned this before, just a reminder to let administration, well, my colleague Todd basically, across the hall and our volunteers know if you would like a vegetarian meal, or if you have, remind us if you have any other concerns, allergies or anything else to do with what might be on the menu tonight. And that's about it for my remarks. Thank you on my own behalf, Catherine, for your presentation today. We have a little bit of extra time for coffee, so let's get to it, and we'll get into the technical breakouts after that. Thanks, everyone.